Coming up next on Insights on PBS Hawaii, what are the races to watch in the upcoming election? Aloha and welcome to Insights on PBS Hawaii. I'm Daryl Huff with Hawaii News Now for Insights on PBS Hawaii. Election season will soon be heating up and we'll be hearing a lot about politics. Democrats and Republicans will duke it out in their respective primaries, with the winners going head-to-head in the November general election. What's the winning strategy? What issues will draw voters and differentiate those candidates? What are the races to watch in the upcoming election? We invite you to join our conversation by calling, emailing, or tweeting your questions and comments. Now to our panel. Pat Saiki is the chairwoman of the Hawaii Republican Party, a former U.S. Congresswoman and member of the State House of Representatives and Senate. She has spent nearly 4 decades as an elected official. Chad Blair is political reporter at Civil Beat, an online publication specializing in public policy reporting. He has worked in the news business in Hawaii for more than 20 years. Colin Moore is an assistant professor of political science at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. Colin's teaching and research interests include American politics, health policy, and campaigns and elections. And Dante Carpenter is the chairman of the Democratic Party in Hawaii. He has served 22 years in politics as a Hawaii Island County councilman, a state senator, and as the Hawaii Island mayor. Let me start with you, Chairman Carpenter. You know, sometimes I picture Democrats, and I also can't help but think of demolition derby, where all the cars crash, and the one who wins is the one who survives. How do you handle that? How do you strategize around that? And is that really good for your party?
Interesting you bring that question in that particular context, because when I was growing up and hadn't really been involved in politics yet, I was the chairman of the Na'alehu Community Club, and we did have a demolition derby, and we did have parachuters falling into that, and we also had a wrestling contest right after the demolition derby and a mini rodeo, and the wrestlers were so ticked off that they were in this field with a little bit of horse manure and a whole bunch of other things. And so the scene that you kind of depict is one that befits very nicely the political scenario from time to time.
Parachuters, manure, and all that.
It's all there. It's all in there. And I guess Pat and I have the challenge of trying to determine the credibility of the individuals who purport to want to represent their communities and do good for the public. And we really can't make the decisions ourselves, but try to encourage them to do the best they can within the confines or the I want to say the deliberation of the aspects of our political party strategies.
But it seems like, though, that the ambition level does bring an awful lot of people. Every time there's a vacancy at a high level, you end up with people just rushing like, you know, I don't even want to make another analogy for fear of talking about manure. But I mean, is that something you have to manage? Is it manageable?
I don't think I don't look to manage that. I think it happens. There was criticism by a representative in the House for use of terminology which they didn't feel was appropriate. That particular lady is under one House seat. There are 7 candidates from the same party vying for that seat at this time. 2 Republicans and 7 Democrats, including herself. So,
you're saying it's sort of self-regulating, or the enforcement is from the voters?
The enforcement is from the voters, and those who feel that somebody is either weak by virtue of having made a faux pas or some kind of a mistake, which is conveyed in a negative sense, and then allows them to then perhaps succeed.
Dante, which race are you talking about?
Okay, well, I'm talking about
Fehanaha, on the Big Island.
Okay. On the Big Island. And you know, interestingly enough, we also know that when you have that many people vying for the same seat, the votes get thinned out quite a bit, and it may be such a thing that she may end up with more votes just.
Yeah.
You know,
Pat,
by virtue of that scenario.
Yeah, thanks,
so
Pat.
It's
you know,
strange.
But you have kind of the opposite.
Well, you bring up the problem of having too many candidates vying for one seat. Well,
I think Dante has a kind of a situation with a party that has been in control of this state for the last 60 years. We have a one-party state. And when you get to be a one-party state, you get to be pretty powerful. And the people within it are going to divide up into factions. So I think Dante is facing the question of how do you control these factions within the Democrat Party? And so you see the division, for instance, in the U.S. Senate race between Hanabusa and Schatz. Well, one represents the old school Democrat, old-timers, you know, the Ariyoshis and the Cayetanos and so forth, and Inoue. And then on the other hand, you have the progressives, the younger people who are vying with Schatz to take control. So you're going to have this kind of fractionalization within the party. And maybe it's a luxury, I don't know, but I think you've got your problems.
Let me ask
It's a challenge, to be sure.
Let me follow up.
It's a challenge, yes.
Yeah, but I mean, is that good? I mean, you're saying there's
You mean the
one-party state.
factionalization?
No, the one-party state is obviously something you're trying to change as the chair of the
Absolutely.
Republic. But I mean, is it bad or good for the voters to have that kind of activity happening in front of them?
I think it's entertaining for the voters, and they have to make their choices if they're going to vote in that primary. But on the other hand, if you had a strong Republican Party with candidates that are going to question what the Democrats are doing, maybe they won't be so factionalized, because they will provide an opposition thought, opposition ideas, different perspectives, and sticking with our principles of smaller government, more, shall we say, fiscal responsibility, looking at more openness in government. Maybe if we had more candidates on the Republican side winning races, we could provide the challenge to keep the Democrats in line.
Let me move to Colin. I mean, the structure of our party system has, you know, it's been organic. It wasn't by some grand conspiracy it happened. And so tell us, what do you think? And you've studied other jurisdictions. How does Hawaii look compared to those other places? And is what we're experiencing unusual? And is it good or bad for the voters?
Well, I think one-party states, it's not a healthy thing for voters. I mean, I would like to see an aggressive opposition, whether that's the Republicans or a third party to emerge, to give voters a clear choice. And I think it is unique. I mean, the Schatz-Hanabusa primary is certainly unique in the nation right now, because there's so few ideological differences between these two candidates that this race can't help but become very personal. And then I'm not sure how voters make decisions when, you know, it's about, you know, very, very small distinctions. They don't really have a clear choice. But I agree with Pat. I'd love to see a vigorous opposition party. You know, I'm indifferent to what that party might be, but I think it's a healthy thing. And I think you see other states, Massachusetts, you know, single-party states where the Democratic Party dominates, or in the Deep South where the Republican Party dominates. I don't think it's a healthy thing for democracy.
Chad, what's your perspective on that? And do you see us, by momentum, sort of further marginalizing the Republicans over time, with the Democrats basically having a one-party fight over the spoils situation?
Well, I'll point out two things. Right now, the Democratic Party of Hawaii is actually suing to change the primary system so that, sorry, Dante, but I had to bring it up, but your attorney, Tony Gill, he has a constitutional question that he feels is very important, and that primaries should serve as a referendum, if you will, on principles that you stand for, the same with Pat and the Republicans. But as some have argued and criticized the party, you're basically saying, you know, you can only vote for us if you're a Democrat. Right now we have it's technically an open primary system. Yes, you can go in there, you can vote Republican, or you can vote Democrat, you can vote Libertarian. You can only vote for one of those tickets. So I think that's one thing that I find to be concerning. The other point I would bring up is, in reality, the number of people who identify themselves as Democrat or Republican is on the decline. That's right. And there's really independents that are rising across the country and here at home. Just think about this. Our county councils are nonpartisan races. Our mayoral elections are nonpartisan. So why do we need party politics at the legislature and governor and Congress, but not for these other very important bodies?
That's a good question. I know when I first got involved, I ran for the county council on the Big Island, and it was a partisan thing then. One of the things that I think we synopsized was that if we're going to be truly representative of the community, then we better get with the program in terms of going to the legislature if we're going to get funding from that particular body, and if we're also going to get funding from the United States Congress, which is a partisan body as well, then we better be partisan equally, so that at least we can step up and say, I'm a Democrat too, or we're with the majority party of our particular community or county, and therefore, we'd like to converse on these particular subjects in conjunction with our party platform. So we have simpatico in that particular thing. So the fact that now it's gone the other way now makes it kind of like, oh, okay, now which balls are in the air? How does the political system work from the basic communities in the individual counties as against the structure of partisan politics at the state level and then the federal level too?
Well, let me just throw one thing out there. Pat, you served in Congress as a Republican, one of only 3 from Hawaii. Would you say that the Democratic and Republican two-party system is working in Washington right now?
Not right now.
Arguably, gridlock is worse than it could possibly be.
no.
Right. Earmarks have been essentially cut out. And so I'm wondering whether there still is a good argument to continue to have a two-party system, or at least maybe encourage third parties, independent parties.
Let me throw this one out. I think this first part of our conversation has evolved into sort of a conditions in which we exist sort of conversation. We also exist in a condition of having the worst voter turnout in the country.
Absolutely.
And I mean, how much, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit, Chairman Carpenter, because I once heard a very powerful Democrat said, oh, the reason there's so much apathy is because everybody's happy. I mean, is it a sense among Democrats, for example, that we're a one party, we've got our power and we've got our place, and the low voter turnout is because everybody's happy with us?
I think in a sense that may be true. There's also a sense of I give up. And I guess I feel badly about that because I've always been for the little guy. I don't care where you come from, what your problem is or what your concerns are, but I want to make sure that guy gets heard, and that hurt that may be involved with that particular scenario needs to be corrected, and somebody needs to pay attention to that. And so I don't care what party that represents, whether it's green, yellow, orange, or purple. To me, that's the importance of the Democratic Party. You overlook almost at certain times the absence of other parties and the absence of other competition, and create our own. It seems by having our own guys contest each other, and maybe that's a good thing. And in the absence of large amounts of competing entities, we do have a large amount of competition within our own group.
It is really a shame when less than 45% of the registered voters don't bother to go out to the polls. I mean, we are the worst state in the nation for voter participation. And you ask why. And maybe people are happy, maybe that they're not happy. Yeah. But I think basically it's because we don't have a contests between parties. We don't have people coming up and contesting others. And the Democrats have been in such control for such a long time that most people say, oh, well, they're going to win anyway. So as chairman of the Republican Party, of course, and I've been chairman only for 3.5 weeks, I'll tell you, I've been working hard, trying to recruit candidates, trying to raise funds to build the party, trying to get voter registration up, and putting a focus on voter participation.
But let me, though, to Colin, you kind of are describing a vicious cycle.
Well,
right?
And that's precisely right. I mean, so I spend my days lecturing to 18 and 19-year-olds about politics, and the youth voter turnout in Hawaii is the real crisis. That's the thing that scares me. We used to have a high voter turnout here. If you look at under 25 voter turnout here, it is unbelievably low. And so what happens when the older folks are no longer with us, and this younger group of voters who have not been socialized into voting take over? It's just going to continue to decline because people vote, it turns out, the political science research says, they vote because they see it as a civic duty, more actually than they see it as some important election that's going to actively affect their life. And people learn that from their parents, from their grandparents. If you're not socialized into thinking that voting is your duty, you just don't do it. And it is this vicious cycle, and that's what scares me. What do we say when voter turnout drops below? What happens if it drops below 30%? I mean, it would be terrifying.
This is even when we get a local son, Barack Obama, on the ballot in 2008 and 2012. Still, that was the case, that folks weren't turning out, particularly the younger people that the president appeared to appeal to very strongly.
That's right.
Well, the recent data that I've seen is that the younger folks are now going to ignore this election because he's not running. So, so what do you, Pat, for example, you mentioned recruiting candidates.
Yes.
Are you particularly interested in finding young people? I know that some of the candidates,
Certainly we're going to look at young people and try to get them involved.
There are young Republicans, right? I say that facetiously.
Hey, watch it now. Oh yes, we have young Republicans, and he's absolutely right. The doctor here is it's very true. The younger people are not participating in politics because they've given up, or they feel that they really don't have a skin in the game. And so I'm trying to get them involved and enthusiastic, not only in becoming candidates, but becoming party workers. In other words, building a structure through which a party can go out and get people involved. And that's what I'm trying to do. And I know it's a tough battle, but it's worth it.
There are actually a couple of very promising young Republicans, folks in their 20s and early 30s in the party right now, in the legislature. I would say Beth Fukumoto and Erin Ling Johansson, just two examples. Both are in the State House of Representatives. And there does appear to be a newer generation coming along that's seeking to fill that void that's going to be left by others. So yes, Daryl, there are young Republicans in the state of Hawaii, but on the other hand, there are also a lot of young Democrats as well, representing themselves, getting into office too.
Yeah, that was a facetious question. I actually have met all those young people, and they are quite good. We did a special report a number of years ago, just talking to people under 40 in the legislature, and you're talking about a lot of powerful people who are in their late 30s, early 40s. But let me chat again. Now, your civil beat is on the cutting edge of electronic reporting.
Thanks for the plug, Daryl. Thank you. Civilbeat.com, I think.
Now
is
you
what
can
you
go
meant
home.
to say.
But is it your impression that is engaging young people, if we're talking about engaging young people, any more than, or is it just a tool that us older folks are using to communicate the same messages again?
Well, I tell you, my mother is in her late 70s, and I know she's watching tonight. I'd be remiss if I didn't say hello. She is probably Civil Beat's biggest fan, and at one point, my brothers and sisters said, let's get her an iPad. And we thought, there's no way she'll figure out an iPad. Wrong. She's totally into it. She's commenting on the sites. She's going to the Facebook pages. I have been impressed how the older generations, the middle generations, if you will, are embracing social media as a way to reach out and communicate. And that's been a real delight to see that. And on the other end of the spectrum, too, the younger folks as well. Although I sense you're right. It's not nearly... There is some concern as to whether they're going to come along and follow that public service of which you spoke earlier, Colin.
Let me ask you.
But I think that Colin is exactly right. The educational system today, as we have it, does not focus attention on government and politics. It's not politically correct to get involved in this. And what you're saying and what you're doing is very important in getting the young people to understand why it's important to participate.
I agree. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how do you get traction with these folks, with these kids?
You have to make it exciting. I mean, you have to explain why they should care. It's not clear why these talking heads, the people in the legislature. I mean, part of this is just demystifying the process. I mean, it seems, I think, very complex and rather boring. And if you can make it, you can understand, you're actually, the taxes you pay are very closely connected to these decisions in the legislature. Actually, what happens in Washington, although we're very far away from Washington, might affect us in Hawaii more than any other state in the nation. And getting them to understand that, I think does make a difference.
We'll talk about young folks.
Can I bring up a point on that?
Sure.
What happens in Washington is very important to the state. Just take a look at what's happening in our races for Congress. I mean, we have one Republican, Charles DeJoux, who is running for the congressional seat, which I used to sit in, by the way.
That's right.
That's right. It's your
That's right. But you see, the way things are developing in Washington, it looks as though very likely you're going to have Republican Senate and a Republican House. And if the Republicans are in the majority of both bodies, Hawaii is not going to be represented in either body? I mean, my God, that's what Charles Bijou is doing. He's trying to be the representative to at least show that Hawaii exists and can take its rightful place in the bodies that are going to make the right decisions.
Well, let's move this conversation a little bit towards some candidates now. And again, this is early. We've talked about it. It's still about 2.5 months till the filing deadline, but 2.5 months till the filing deadline. And so far, are you going to have a significant candidate to run against the winner of the Shots Hanabusa race? You know, and there's actually 2 congressional races.
Right. We're working on it. We're working on it. But Charles is the figure that we're looking at, the one person that can make a difference.
And let's talk some more about the Shots. I almost said Inouye Abercrombie race,
Yeah.
but the Shots Hanabusa race. Now, the number one thing we've been talking about again, probably much to the governor's regret, is the death wish. You know, the Inouye letter, and we have a couple of questions here. You know, Chairman Carpenter, how do you think that is going to play out, and is that kind of thing something the Democrats can be proud of, that even happened?
One of the interesting things about that was obviously I sat as the chair to get a replacement for the Honorable Senator Inouye when he passed. One of the unique things about that replacement process was we could appoint a replacement for a sitting United States Senator because that individual passed away, leaving a vacancy. In the absence of a congressman person, a representative, a election is required. There is no filling by appointment. And so one of the problems that immediately inured was that if any one of our congresspersons were appointed to fill the good senator's seat, we would then immediately have a vacancy in that congressional office, and we would essentially, what the good senator always was speaking to and addressing was seniority. So the essence is we would have had, even though Maisie moved from the House to the Senate eventually, she starts off with 0 seniority in the United States Senate. Tulsi had 0 seniority in the House of Representatives. If there was a vacancy in the House, by virtue of Colleen in this case having been appointed, that person would start off with 0 seniority in the House. So we'd have 2 individuals with 0 seniority. And notwithstanding Colleen's thing, if she was appointed to that seat, she would have 0 seniority in the United States Senate as well. So we'd have 4 congresspeople with 0 seniority.
Right.
But the more important part is you would not have a Congress person sitting in that seat for minimum 3 months, because that's how long it takes to fill an election, a special election, which is required by the U.S. Constitution and the Constitution of the state of Hawaii as well. So that was part of the dichotomy.
Yes, that was, and the governor explained that, but at the same time, Senator Inouye presumably knew all that when he said do Hanabusa. So, I mean, I guess what I'm asking is, does stuff like that make the voters go, oh, it's all big
good.
daddy politics?
No, I don't think so. I don't think that that's satisfactory to them. They go pretty much on the basis of what somebody says, somebody said, and a very emotional situation, which obviously it's turned out to be.
You know, Daryl, I was talking to a well-known lobbyist in town. Everybody knows him. I won't say his name, but I said, well, what do you
made
think?
him say a name.
I said, does Neil have this in the bag? I mean, can David Ige really pull off the primary challenge? And this lobbyist said, oh, no, you get Neil Abercrombie on the stump and doing retail politics, there's really probably nobody better in the state. And then he said, unless he has a YouTube moment. Now, in this case, there was no YouTube. It was the Los Angeles Times. But what the governor managed to do, and I think it was unfortunate for his campaign as well as Senator Schatz's campaign, was he brought back something that really had dropped off the radar. The fact that Senator Noy had appointed, that was the replacement was Senator Schatz to that seat, that it was an appointed position, and that it's going to bring it all up again. When the governor had to apologize to Dana Noy's widow on the front page of our newspapers and TV channels, that brings back something that I think we'll be remembering that, because the election is not that far away.
Let me, I love this conversation, but I think I need to be respectful of some of our callers here. And one person said, well, you know, if we are a one-party state, then how did Linda Lingle get elected? And I think you must ponder that all the time. What is the quality that makes a candidate who the Republican Party, which we may have, you know, how well does what the Republican Party is doing in Washington play among Hawaii voters? Is that a dilemma for you?
What was that?
The conduct of the Republican parties nationally.
Yeah.
Do you think that that's something that most local Republicans would hang their hats on and say, oh, I want to be like those guys?
No, I don't think so. I mean, politics is local. You know, people believe in the local politics. And what they do, however, is know that a lot of the funding comes out of the United States Congress, and that Hawaii needs a voice in the United States Congress. So to have all Democrats in both the House and the Senate in the Congress would be a shame if we didn't have at least one Republican as a member of the majority party.
But how do you get them elected?
Well, that's what we're trying to do. What do you think this is?
You know, it's certainly, you know, governors have had an easier time doing this in states that are dominated by one party or the other. But you see this occasionally in states that are either very liberal or conservative. Think Scott Brown in Massachusetts. I think sometimes voters have a perception when a party has dominated for a long time that it's corrupt or it's not being effectively responsive. And if you can get the right candidate who can position themselves as a moderate, they can occasionally be successful, particularly for a number of reasons for the governor's office. But I think it is a little more difficult when they're trying to get in the Congress or the Senate. You know, I think particularly for Republicans here, because there is this image of a very conservative mainland Republican Party that is attached to them. I mean, the legacy of the Tea Party is, I think, damaging to our local Republicans.
And by the way, Scott Brown is now running from New Hampshire.
Yes, and now, right, so.
No longer in Massachusetts. You know the way Linda Lingle did it, I think, is, first of all, she came off a tough 8 years with Ben Cayetano. The governor had to make some tough decisions. There were some economic problems. There was the labor situation. I'm not going to go back into that. But there was an opportunity there. And Lingle just barely lost that first challenge by about 5,000 votes or so. Very good leader, very competent, good record on Maui, and there was an opening there. And then that's how those things happen. And I think you have to be fairly moderate to succeed. Pat Saiki is probably the perfect example of, with all due respect, a moderate Republican that's able to work across the aisles. Right. You were tremendously successful in the legislature and in Congress. And I think Charles DeJoux, in many ways, is trying to follow in that mode. He's not Ted Cruz.
No, thank goodness.
Yeah, thank goodness.
In a way.
I'm going to interrupt everybody for a moment, so I apologize, but I want to just spend the next 2 minutes. Let's talk about that Senate race. What do you folks think? Each one of you, maybe 15 or 20 seconds. How do you see it playing out?
The United States Senate race.
Yeah,
between
Hanabusa
Colleen
and Schatz. Yes.
Of course, there are other candidates. You know that there are at least another 4 candidates, both Republicans and Democrats. But those two would more than likely be the principals. I think it's going to be a very tough battle all the way across the line, irrespective of the money difference. And we know that Schatz war chest is probably twice as large as Hanabusa's at this time. But I think there is enough of a division of the House, if you will, in terms of support from various labor organizations and ethnic divides, that it's going to be, in my view, a jump ball.
Okay.
It could go either way.
We've pulled this race 3 times over the last year, and it hasn't budged. It is tied. The undecideds have somewhat narrowed, just a little bit more. Colleen has slightly better name recognition than Brian, although that's changing as well. There are so many things this race touches on, and there's a reason why the national pundits are looking at this. I think they tend to focus much more on gender and ethnicity and so forth. But having said that, Brian Schatz' first TV ads are about Social Security and equal pay for women. So clearly that is a factor. It's really, I thought Hirono Case was exciting, and then Hirono Lingle. This is just off the map in terms of an important race.
Colin, let me ask you, what do you think are going to be the driving factors here? Because in addition to those commercials being about those issues, they also placed him among almost entirely Asian casts.
Well, I mean, there's clearly, they're making some strategic decisions there with the visuals. But what I'll say about this race is I think it's mainly going to be a turnout race. I think whoever can get their supporters to the polls is the person that's going to win. It's not really going to be about persuasion. It's not going to be about these undecided voters who, for the most part, are not the kind of folks who turn out to vote. They're usually not well-informed voters. I think really, whether it's Hanabusa or Schatz, and I think Hanabusa has a slight edge here, whoever can get their supporters, more of their supporters to the polls is going to be the victor.
Pat?
Spoken like a true professor. Absolutely. That
Yeah, I didn't hear
he
an
is
answer either.
absolutely he is absolutely right. But you have to look at the underpinnings and the underground feelings that exist within the Democrat Party. I mean, like I said, it's hooky. It's the old guard versus the new guard. And it depends on who is better organized and how bitter this thing gets, if it does get bitter. And then the turnout is going to make the decision. So it's like you say, it's a toss-up. But basically, it's who is stronger within the Democrat Party.
And ultimately, when you walk into that ballot box, a lot of times your decision is driven by how you feel as opposed to what you think.
That's exactly right. What your alliances are. And, you know, local politics is alliances.
Yeah. I'm going to read this brief message back to our viewers to remind everyone that tonight we're asking, what are the races to watch in the upcoming elections? We invite you to join our conversation by calling, emailing, or tweeting your questions and comments. Call 973-1000 on Oahu and 800-283-4847 from the neighbor islands. And on that note, I am going to attend to these many questions that have been coming in.
They're coming in.
A comment more from Peter on the North Shore. The younger population doesn't vote because they don't respect the politicians. Strong statement, okay. A question about what percentage of registered Democrats participate in the formal activities of the precincts, districts, or state conventions. The suggestion being that it's a small group of people even within the Democratic Party that are active. You have a counter to that?
Nope, I think that's right on. It's a correct observation.
I tell you, our viewers are really smart.
And so I must commend that viewer for being very astute.
So that's something you got to work on too.
Unfortunately, I wish our elected politicians were as astute.
Whew, okay. How do the panelists feel about term limits? More candidates try for non-incumbent seats. Maybe the system needs to be shaken up. Pat, I know you feel that way.
No, not necessarily. I think incumbency has its part, its role. It takes a long time to learn how to be a good legislator. You know, if you put term limits, then you really set limits to learning, to tell you the truth. Mm-hmm. And the voters will decide. The voters will decide, as far as I'm concerned, as to when a politician's term is to be ended. So that I think we leave it to the voters to make a decision as to when they want to get rid of the politician and let people stay as long as they are effective.
Okay, let me bring up another. Richard from Makiki. The younger voters are more knowledgeable than you think. We see that the leaders running the country are hypocrites and corrupt. It doesn't matter how we vote because we don't have the billions of dollars that the special interests do. Colin, I'd like you to hear you.
Well, this is very concerning, particularly after the recent Supreme Court decision. And I think whether or not money buys some kind of quid pro quo votes for money thing, the perception that it does is the most dangerous thing of all. And I think after Citizens United, after the more recent decisions, I think this, among younger voters in particular, is the fear that it doesn't matter what you do, massive special interests with millions of dollars to spend will be able to defeat you at every turn. And I'm not sure that's actually empirically true always. I mean, you can still make a lot of progress with organized voters who don't have a lot of money, but the perception is really, really dangerous because when people feel like it doesn't matter if they participate, then that's where you get the kind of shockingly low voter turnout that we have.
Here's a punctuation mark to that. This state only cares about the very rich or very poor, and the middle class is going away. Low voter turnout is because neither Democrats or Republicans are addressing what people care about. Chad, you have a comment on that?
It seems like you're getting more statements than questions from our viewers.
That's good. That's fine.
Good.
You know,
That's good. And we're obviously taking notes. I don't think that they're far off.
Yeah.
They're good observations.
Exactly. I think that, let me try a couple of issue questions.
Because, you know, what we haven't really addressed are the real problems that face us. The high cost of living, the high cost of food, drugs, transportation, gasoline. Let's face it, our local people are struggling to put food on the table. Indeed. People have to take 2 jobs in order to exist. And you know, I'll tell you, I walk my dog every morning. I bump into neighbors. And I had a very touching experience the other day when a lady told me, with tears in her eyes, that, Pat, she says, we've got to do something. My son and his family have to move to the mainland because they can no longer afford to live here. They can't support their 3 children, provide them a good education, and meet all the needs. They can't even buy a home. It's too expensive. And she says, why is it the way it is? Why can't we do something? Why can't we change
But
things?
as touching as that story is, I heard it 30 years ago, and these are the same problems, and I would add homelessness, which is an issue
there it
that
is.
we've seen. You're absolutely right. We're going to hear all these candidates talk about, I'm for Hawaii, local values, I
That's
will be the
right.
person to represent you, but so much has gotten worse, and the cost of living would be right at the top. I realize part of it's we're an island, and we import so much of our energy and food and so forth, but it is frustrating. You asked who are all the happy people. I suppose it's the people that are in power.
You know, the interesting question that comes up and is about the demographics and what people have to go through in order to make a living, to get by, to afford a house. We have also an important statistic, the biggest number of multi-generational homes in the nation.
Yes.
You know, people struggling to get by, and you know, let me just throw it to you, Dante, since we've crossed into this. Is there a message in the Democratic Party that brings hope to people? Or is it just, you know, we got to fix this, you know, tinkering instead of
No, I
grand
don't
thinking?
think it's. I think the Democratic Party is well aware that more than tinkering is required. That the impacts financially to virtually every family that is not earning between $60,000 and $70,000 a year, they're on the slide, going down. The more, and what I guess is one of the anomalies is that as we continue to build newer homes, invite visitors basically to come here and live, we basically drive ourselves out of our livelihoods as well, and the ability to be able to afford our own home. So there's a real dichotomy here that on the one hand is necessary to bring in revenues to provide a certain quantity of jobs. On the other hand, that amount of revenue that is earned is not adequate enough to support a family of 3 or 4 or more to live reasonably comfortably
Ted, let me
without
ask this
having
question.
2 jobs.
Are you seeing big ideas in this campaign, or is it mostly just personalities and, you know?
Well, there's no question there's personalities. Give Neil Abercrombie some credit, whether you agree with him or not. He did have this big vision plan when he ran in 2010, his new day. And at some point, some enterprising reporter, probably me, is going to go through there, and maybe the advertiser will as well, and say, well, how'd we do 4 years later, Governor? And I suppose there will be some things that he can point to and some other things that he cannot. But right now, Democrats can't even agree on a minimum wage hike right now in the state legislature. It died last year because the 2 sides could not agree. There are big questions. Is it $10? Is it $10.10? What about the tip credit? When does it kick in and so forth? But talk about people struggling on 2 or 3 jobs. And if we can't solve these kind of things, how can you then talk about the bigger issues? And in that regard, I think Senator Schatz did try and raise attention on the environment, global warming, climate change, bringing Al Gore this week. But when we're struggling to get by, we don't think about the shorelines, the oceans rising and flooding Waikiki.
Colin?
Yes.
You know, do you think that the politicians are actually avoiding the big issues locally because it's just too hard and they're focusing on more trivial things?
Well, I mean, I don't know if focusing on, I mean, the minimum wage, we'll see if we get this through. I mean, that really will help a lot of folks around here, I think. I mean, I think that focusing on the abstract issues tends not to pay off very well in elections, certainly state-level elections. So, I mean, I think they're making a pretty rational decision to focus on some bread and butter things that people can really see. Do they want to focus on controversial issues? Of course not. I mean, nobody wanted to talk about, for example, marijuana this term and a few other things. But I.
Well, let me interrupt you. Sorry.
Yeah.
We do have a direct question, John from Waianae. What issues will be important to voters this year? Pat?
Cost of living. Cost of living.
I agree. Cost of living, increasing cost of health care,
That's right.
Energy.
I think a creeping issue that may not have surfaced as prominently is the what happened with the same-sex marriage debate.
I got a question right here from
And
someone
I
about
think
that.
it does tie in here. I am already seeing a lot of activism from groups like the Hawaii Christian Coalition, Hawaii Family Advocates, Hawaii Family Forum, that say the legislature was not listening to us. And if you watch those hearings, if you were down there like I was, it was overwhelmingly opposed to same-sex marriage. And I'm seeing now targeting races because of that singular issue. By extension, what do we teach our kids in school? The Pono Choices program being another. Social issues can be very divisive, and while it appears to be gay marriage is catching on, in fact, most of the United States has not legalized it. So I think social issues, and particularly involving same-sex marriage and what we teach our kids, may be a sleeper issue, one that's maybe awoken.
Pat, I mean, are you getting people coming to you saying, I want to run as a Republican this year because I really want to do something about this same-sex marriage
Basically,
thing?
the concern that has been expressed is not so much the issue itself, but how it evolved.
That's a good point.
Okay? The fact is that, like I say, when you have a one-party state, those people can make decisions behind closed doors. They can deny people the right to vote on that issue and create a special session and shove it through with public.
Let the people vote. We
Let
heard
the people
that
vote,
over
yes.
and over again. Of course, there is a
Yes.
question about whether you should put social issues on the ballot to be decided, but that does
It's
happen.
been done
It
before.
definitely has.
Especially on something like this, which is a
Correct.
moral issue.
Yes.
The same thing with Pono Choices.
And a civil rights issue, particularly with
The civil
same-sex
rights
marriage.
issue,
Yeah.
yes.
Let's really quickly, Colin and Chad, are there candidates we're seeing who have emerged because or changed their plans or are emerging that you've seen that are coming out because of the same-sex marriage
Richard
issue?
Fawnley, the State House representative from the North Shore, I believe he's Mormon, Laie, the Mormon temple there. He knocked off a sitting Republican 2 years ago who's now jumped parties. He has announced that he's going to be challenging Clayton He, the longtime Democrat, that's Senate District 23. Clayton He, arguably the most visible advocate for pushing Senate Bill 1, and that has already been clear. I mean, he's already jumping. He's only been in the House not even one term, and he's already saying, I'm going to take this guy down, largely because they aren't listening to us on these key issues.
And then, Colin, you have anybody?
Well, I was thinking of exactly the same race as Chad, but I'll be really curious to see how well this plays out. I mean, same-sex marriage has been something that has, support for it has dramatically increased, here and throughout the United States. I mean, now a majority of Americans support it. So I don't know if it's going to have the same kind of political power that it did 5-10 years ago. I mean, but we'll see.
The domino effect of what happens when someone decides to run, someone else moves out of a seat. You mentioned some speculation that Clayton He may actually have higher ambitions, perhaps
Are you going
because
to pin
of
that
his...
one on me, Darryl?
You said it. I'm not going to.
Well, Clayton, he has run for Congress before. He has run for lieutenant governor before. He has over 400. He has more money than any other state legislator. Over 400 grand in his war chest, and sure, he has ambitions. He's seen his good buddies Neil Abercrombie and Ben Cayetano go on to higher office. So I think that could happen. I'd throw one other issue out as well. The GMO issue, the pro and the anti, and you're already seeing some candidates emerging, particularly on the anti-GMO platform, challenging people, saying we need to have labeling of our food, we need to control pesticides. The mayor of Kauai, I think, will be having some challenges in that regard as well. And but there are some candidates already coming out saying, I don't like what the legislature has done or hasn't done, really, about GMO.
Colin, on that, any people jumping out on GMO that you've seen? How do you think that plays? I mean, that's a tough issue to even describe or You think that one's a little bit, I'm trying to think of the word, when people just use hyperbole and they don't talk facts?
Well, it is, I think it is, whoa, it is.
I'm not talking about one side or the other.
I think it's an issue that surprised a lot of people. I think it really shocked our members in Washington. I think it shocked folks in the legislature about how passionate people were, but particularly the anti-GMO folks. And I think they're not sure how to handle it. I mean, people didn't want to talk about it this session a whole lot, I think.
Or last
So,
session,
yeah.
but bills were passed on the Big Island and on Kauai, controlling, regulating, even prohibiting in a lot of cases.
What are the issues, everyone here, when it comes to the governor's race, when you talk about Senator Inouye's choice, David Ige sort of seems to be representing the Senator Inouye faction versus Abercrombie. What are the issues you think they're going to play out in the governor's race?
Dante, you want to take that one first?
I think some of the things that Neil, as Governor Abercrombie, has already initiated relating to the economy, initially tightening down in order to develop some modicum of control over the expenditures and putting the brakes on those expenditures, which otherwise were allocated by the legislature, and then having saved some monies over the interim, and then now to be in this position of wanting to then utilize those funds that were ostensibly saved for economic ventures that the state could get itself involved in, including senior housing and things of that nature, which would generate jobs and spur the economy and a whole bunch of other things. But now it kind of gets lost perhaps in the momentum with what is it, that body that looks at the future incomes.
Council on Revenues.
Council on Revenues is now saying, woo, chotomate, maybe it's not going to happen.
It's going to be hard for the governor to run
so
on
the governor is kind of like,
right?
and the legislature is kind of like taking a very conservative attitude as well. How that combines together in light of the fact that we still need jobs, economy boost, et cetera, et cetera. So it seems we've got a jumble of ideas that running at cross purposes rather than going together.
We still go back to the basic politics of the whole situation. And again, this is the same division that you have in the Democrat Party. Ige versus Abercrombie is the same as Hanabusa versus Schatz. That division is there. The old guard versus the new guard. And they're going to battle it out. So that's why Duke Iona on our part is going to come through, and we're going to be able to solve the problems here.
Do you think
and we're going to give people a choice.
So what do you think could be the issues?
After the decision is made in the primary, of course.
Yeah, this was primarily a discussion about primaries, so that's why I felt sort of badly because you don't have a whole lot of contested primaries for us to talk
but
about
we've
yet.
got Charles Dejoux and we've got Duke Iona, and they're going to play a very significant role in this campaign.
And so, but what issues do you think will play out through the length of the governor's race? Do you think that the Democrats can run on the strength of the economy, for example?
Well, that's the point. As I said earlier, you got to get down to the basics. The cost of living, the difficulty with which people are having to accommodate themselves by holding two jobs, looking at education. It's a struggle for people to be able to survive in this community. The high cost of energy, the high cost of water, the high cost of gasoline. All of these topics, I'm sure, are going to be at the core or the basics of what a campaign is going to be all about.
I would throw two things in here. Duke Iona probably looks far more attractive as a candidate than he did 4 years ago. The last year or two of the Lingle administration, very difficult, furlough Fridays, and he got stomped by the governor, Abercrombie, in that race. But things have changed. And remember, the economy, unemployment is 4.6%. We do still have a budget surplus, not nearly as big as it used to be.
4.6%.
Well,
Why? Take a good look.
I know, and a lot of the
because
jobs.
people have two jobs.
Exactly, or they're not reporting those
That's
things.
right.
But one of the David Ige's, I think, best campaign pitches, if you will, is, that surplus that we had, or managing the budget. He ran Ways and Means, and he and Sylvia Luke have both pointed out, running both the money committees, saying, you know, the governor gives us the budget, but we're really the ones that go through there and make those decisions. And we actually made some decisions the governor didn't like.
Colin, do you think anybody understands this argument to the point that it's going to affect their votes, really?
No, absolutely not.
Agreed.
And you know, and I mean, I think that that he has done some great things in his position. But I mean, if you look at the polling, most of what you're seeing for Ige's support is just not Abercrombie, right?
Anybody but Abercrombie.
Anybody but Abercrombie.
are.
So I mean, you know, that would be the difference, I think, between the Schatz and Hayabusa race and the Abercrombie
That's
and
right.
Ige race is
The
that he
basic-
just doesn't have
That's right.
any name recognition or very, very little outside of
That's
his
right.
district. And to make to really make a pitch, you'll have to have something much more compelling than just balancing the budget and getting us a surplus.
I'll go around the table one more time. I'll start with Pat. Where do you think the voters or the public or the media will be surprised this year? We talk about what are the hot races, but what do you think the surprises are? Let me guess. Republicans are going to do much better than expected. But let's talk about the.
Oh, yes,
next-
you're absolutely right. The Republicans are going to come forward and establish themselves as a legitimate party and
What
get out
is
the
it-
vote.
What is
Get
it?
out the vote.
What is it though that's going to create that? I mean, what is it going to happen that's going to make that happen? And so it's just more than wishful thinking.
Well, I would like to think that my leadership is going to get things moving in the Republican Party, and I don't think that we, in the past, have necessarily focused in on what is the critical decision-making thing that affects voters, and that is voter registration. You got to get out there and you got to find the voters, and you got to get them to the polls. And we, as Republicans, have been concentrating a lot on our candidates and the basic issues and so forth. I want to get back to getting the voters out there.
You got to get them to register to vote.
That's it. Getting them to register to vote. And so I have a plan in mind, and it's been only 3.5 weeks, but boy, I'm telling you, we're going to go.
I find it interesting that you're saying that you believe that increased voter registration, increased voter participation is good for Republicans in Hawaii.
Absolutely.
In other states, you know, the argument is flipped on its ear in terms of the partisanship, but interesting point.
Because there is this malaise in our general community. People tend not to vote because either one, they can't get to the polls because they're lazy, or two, they don't care because Democrats are going to control everything anyway, and they might as well live with what they have and try to make the best of it. So if we can get these people energized to understand that their votes do count, and that we have got candidates that can make a difference, then maybe we'll become an entity that can be contended with.
Colin?
Well, I'll say what I hope I'm surprised by, which is that Pat is successful. That we get some great Republican candidates like Duke Iona, like Charles DeJoux, who really do give our Democrats a run for their money. I think that will make people more excited to vote. I think that will really push an interesting conversation and get people to turn out. So I hope you're right, because I hope that's what I'm excited about, that we have a real race.
Do you think, I'm going to follow up with you on this question, because it's sort of a big picture question. Do you think that do you get a sense that there's any anti-incumbent sentiment out there that really has opened the door for this?
I think that I think there is to some extent with the governor. I think that everyone has kind of struggled to put their finger on exactly why he might not be as popular as you would think. So maybe a bit of that, but overall, incumbents always do well. This is one of the truths about American politics, is that if you're an incumbent, it's really tough to lose your seat. And certainly, if you're the governor of Hawaii, it's really, really tough to lose your seat. I don't think a sitting governor has lost since the 60s.
Except for way back in 62,
Yeah,
right?
62.
With Jack Burns defeating, gosh, I've already forgotten the late man's name, a wonderful man, passed away a few years. See, it's been that long. It's been almost a statehood that I can't even remember the name of the incumbent.
But the question is surprising races, interesting races outside of the top two.
Think about this. 2 years ago at this time, would you have predicted Tulsi Gabbard would not only be in the U.S. Congress, but would be far and away the most popular politician, period, in Hawaii. Her numbers are in the 60s or 70s. She surfs. She's heading to Asia this week with Eric Cantor and Paul Ryan, of all people. She's really, she's on the Meet the Press and all those things.
Very popular.
And that you wonder if someone like that is going to be able to come along. I don't know if there's somebody in the CD1 contest. I think Charles certainly has that charisma. Will there be a Donna Kim or a Mark Takai or an Akaka Anderson or Stanley Cheng? I don't know. But I mean, I haven't seen something like that happen in Hawaii politics in a long time.
Dante, let me.
It's certainly possible to do that. But I'm with Pat. I'd like to see more people get registered. And if there are more Republicans coming to the fore, so be it. And frankly, we enjoyed years ago a coalition arrangement in which we shared duties and functions. And that was one of the best, in my view, governments that I ever participated in all of the years that I've been in elected politics.
So you'll encourage the governor to appoint some Republicans?
I encourage a mix of philosophies, ideals, and ideologies for the benefit of the entire community. Yes, you betcha.
Okay, anything else anyone wants to add at this point? I'm curious as to whether, give me one hot Republican other than Charles Dejoux.
Duke Iona.
Come on, Daryl.
Okay, it's time to...
You knew that's what you were going
Thank you all. It's nice to end on a laugh. In 2 weeks on Insights, 2 weeks now till the next Insights. For much of Hawaii's modern history, construction, the military, and tourism have driven our economy. But recent lessons dealt by the death of the sugar plantations, the Gulf War, the attacks of September 11th, and the banking meltdown have proven our vulnerability to wild swings in our economic fortunes. We need to diversify our economy, but how? What will drive our economy in the future? On the next Insights, what is the next salvation for Hawaii's economy? That's in 2 weeks on Insights on PBS Hawaii. I'm Daryl Huff. A hui hou.